For a while now, new Monster Hunter games bring with them new gimmicks and new types of quests aside from the standard hunting, slaying, and gathering quests. 4U had the expedition quests, Generations had the Deviant quest system, World had siege quests, and that brings us to Rise. And Rise brings with it Rampages. And I truly have never felt so polarized and torn by a new quest type in a Monster Hunter game in my life. It's a nightmare to play alone, it sucks to play with randoms, but I weirdly enjoy it when playing with friends. So, let's talk about it. Let's start with what Rampage quests are. Simply put, they are, and I'd like to quote Super right here, glorified tower defenses, and it's just kinda weird. These quests take place in the Stronghold, which are basically just two large pre-selected areas randomly smashed together into a random order with a large gate at the end of each. The first gate is sort of an intermediary gate that usually gets one shot by the final boss of the Rampage, and the second one is your final objective. If it falls, you fail. Pretty straightforward. You will set up fortifications known as hunting installations in the form of ballistae, cannons, decoys, bombs, all that sort of stuff, of which you can only place a set number of, as there is no resource or budget given to you by the game to buy fortifications, they're just limited in number. As you progress through the Rampage, your stronghold level increases and you will unlock newer and stronger defenses, as well as your existing fortifications leveling up as the monsters themselves get stronger. Some of the fortifications are manned by the AI, and they range from somewhere between useless to not very helpful, but I guess extra damage is damage, so. There's 3 classes of defenses, if you could call them that, and they are as follows. Mountable, which are your cannons and your ballistas and just about anything you as a player can get into and use. Auto, which are, as the name suggests, automatically activated depending on what they are. These are the things that are manned by the AI. And limited. The limited fortifications include all of the main Kimura village characters that can assist you for a brief period, such as Elder Fugan or Hanoa and Minoto, as well as like some monster bait thing that always seems to just die instantly whenever I've used it, so yeah. That is until a mechanic known as the counter signal, or as I like to call it, the strong gong, triggers, and following which your weapons do like 10 times the usual damage for some reason. So you get to actually do the Monster Hunter thing, except you repel every monster in a couple of hits. So, yeah. Oh, and there is also your standard big fuck-off installations like the Dragonator and the Splitting Wyvern shots, which deal thousands of damage at a time, but are on a hefty cooldown, which can be shortened, I guess, by standing at a power kiln and holding down A for like a minute. Also not great. As for the monsters themselves, they show up in waves of somewhere between 3 to 5 at a time. Each Rampage has 2 to 3 total hordes, and each monster is also placed into a particular class that alters the way the AI works. Again, this is weird, and I'm not a big fan of it. It just feels like some way to sort of shoehorn in these weird tower defense mechanics. The monster classes are Stalker, Targeter, and Gatecrasher, and before I explain what any of those things mean, fuck Gatecrashers. Alright, cool. Stalker-type monsters behave more or less like a normal monster would in a normal quest. They come after you and attack like the normal Monster Hunter AI usually would. Targeter-type monsters sit at a distance and just hit you with ranged attacks over and over and over and over and over again, and it's just a pain in the ass, really. And that brings us to Gatecrashers, the stupidest of the 3. Gatecrasher-type monsters just gun it for the finish line. They completely disregard everything else and simply want to knock down the gate at the end, because doing so makes them the winners and you a big loser. But seriously, it's so annoying when you're getting sniped by a Rathalos because it's a Targeter, you're getting smacked by a Bishaten because it's a Stalker, and then an Anjanath has just completely ignored everything and is just beating on the final objective. And that brings me to another point. The monster classing. It feels really weird and bizarre for some of them. For example, the Rajang. I think it's a Targeter type monster in the Rampages, even though it's known for pummeling the absolute shit out of you at close range. And then the Anjanath, as I mentioned before, is a Gatecrasher, even though it's always been shown as this sort of really aggressive monster that fights just about anything it sees. I guess it just has beef with the gate. But I digress. On top of these classes, there are also Apex monsters. These monsters are essentially just the deviants from Monster Hunter Generations, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I'm a known fan of the deviant system, and they are generally the final boss of a Rampage. They're an extremely strong version of an existing monster, sporting new moves, higher damage, and a fresh coat of paint to make them seem more evil. As of writing this, there are a total of 5 Apex monsters. Azeroth, Rathian, Mizutsune, Rathalos, and Diablos, sort of increasing in difficulty in that order. The Rampage is over once you defeat the final boss after 2 to 3 hordes of monsters. Now you may have noticed that I said that the Rampage is over when this happens. Not that you win when this happens. That's on purpose, and we'll touch on that in a minute. Now, that just about covers what a Rampage is. Sound like a bit of a mess, or not at all like a Monster Hunter game? Yeah, that's because it kind of is. Rampages as a whole feel unpolished, and like a concept not fully realized. It seems like it was decided that a tower defense segment of the game would be implemented, and it was just kind of thrown in with little to no acknowledgement that it doesn't really fit with the rest of the game. It's also just not terribly difficult, an issue that Rise kind of has overall. I'm not sure if it's the damage output of the fortifications or the damage buff from the counter signal, but I mentioned before that the Rampage ends when you finish off the final boss, and that's because it kind of feels like inevitability. I use those words because I've never failed at Rampage, even the hardest ones available, nor have I really gotten close as far as I know. The apex monsters will nuke the first gate as soon as they arrive and one-shot it, and then the final gate just kinda takes an absolute beating, taking hit after hit after hit. Sure, the whole time the villagers are yelling at you that the monster is hitting the gate, and the gate's about to fall, yada yada yada, but not once have I felt any form of urgency that was actually going to happen. The tension just isn't there. The strong parts of Siege-type quests from previous games like your Lao Shan Lungs and your Jen Morens was not sitting on a cannon or ballista firing away, it was the spectacle, it was the atmosphere. It was the odds feeling stacked against you because this adversary you were tasked to take down just felt beyond your means as a little tiny human. It was the moments like climbing onto their backs or tripping them up to plant bombs on their weak points that made them fun. Take out the spectacle and the atmosphere and replace it with overinflated tower defense mechanics, and your hunter's abilities just feeling so much more like a superhuman than before, and you get the Rampage system. It's just not captivating. It doesn't fill you with awe or really lead to a whole lot of enjoyment. As I said before, it's a nightmare to do alone because you just end up getting knocked around constantly by several monsters at once, because if there are no other hunters with you, you just become the primary focus of everything. So you end up being bombarded from a distance by targeted monsters, pummeled from all angles by stalker monsters, all while the gatecrasher monsters have just walked straight past you to attack the gate behind you. It's a mess. Now, that was a lot of negative. More negative than I tend to go for, especially when it comes to Monster Hunter. But I really do think Rampages are the weakest part of Rise. But after all that, I do have some good things to say, and my thoughts on what could stand to be improved in Rampages specifically. As for the good stuff, it's actually pretty fun with friends. The added hunters means you aren't so overwhelmed by monsters from all directions, and it's quite enjoyable to freak out and screech at each other over voice chat about focusing a particular monster, or to smash the Dragonator at the right time. It's still a mess for sure, but it's at least an enjoyable mess. I think that the foundation is there for something great, and that the Monster Hunter team has proven that they can take something outlandish or seemingly out of place and make it work in the confines of the game. Look at Underwater Combat from Gen 3 for example. Yeah, I see you. I see you typing. Ready to tell me how shit underwater combat is? Well, you're wrong. Yeah, I said it. You're wrong. It was fun. I liked it, and I think it was done pretty fucking well. Anyway, here's a few ways I would fix Rampages personally. Number 1. Stop sticking to stereotypical tower defense mechanics like monsters legging it to the end of the map, or adding just different kinds of mounted guns. I'm talking to you, weird fantasy railgun with infinite ammo. It sucks. It's not fun. I made this sword. I want to hit the monster with a sword. You gave me all these new switch skills, and 3/4 of the time is spent shooting stuff from a ballista. Number 2, find a more intuitive way to implement the counter signal. Why do I just deal 10 times the damage now? Give me something like a special version of my existing weapon, or something that targets the malice inside the monsters, or just anything other than gong, make me strong. Number 3, add higher stakes. Give me limited amounts of feints like normal hunts. Have the installations be gone permanently if I don't protect them properly. Make it easier to lose the whole thing. Give me a reason to want to improve at the Rampages and keep doing them, because right now there really isn't one apart from a handful of exclusive rewards, which I can largely do without and be just fine. Number 4, find a way to make it a bit less of a clusterfuck. The Rampages just have so much going on at the time, and it makes for a shitty experience. I'll be honest, I don't really know how they'd fix this because it seems pretty ingrained in Rampages, but it needs fixing if this feature is to stay in the future. And number 5, the last one. Take the mechanics of the Rampage and the wire bugs, build upon them, and apply them to something more in line with the colossal monster hunts of previous generations. I might get called a boomer for this take, but I can see all of this working so much better against a Lao Shan Lung, a Dalamadeur, Jen Moren, hell, even Yamatsukami. who, for the record, I think would fit really well in Rise. Just give me back that spectacle and atmosphere. Please, Capcom. Please. Well, that about sums up what I have to say about Rampages. I honestly didn't think I'd have enough to say when I sat down to write this, but here we are, like 10 minutes later. Rampages have potential, but in their current state, I'd be happy to see them live and die with Rise, honestly. Thanks for listening to me whinge, and I'll catch y'all on the next one. See ya!
なんとかできたね。